They were the Necrontyr, a pale, suffering people, born beneath a cruel and dying sun. Their star burned with the impatience of old age, its radiation scouring the world below into deserts of glass and ash. The Necrontyr lived short, painful lives, their flesh wasting long before their minds had reached wisdom. Cities rose like mausoleums, built not for glory but defiance, monuments to endurance in a universe that seemed determined to erase them. From the first age, their lives were a war against time itself. Their healers could delay decay but not defeat it. Their scientists crafted domes of metal and radiation-shielding alloys to hold back the sun's wrath. Yet no invention could still the dying inside them. Their poets learned to measure time not in years, but in breaths. Even in triumph, they cursed the dawn that promised another day of pain. But it was not enough merely to endure. Looking outward through distance-spanning telescopes, they saw others, long-lived races whose civilizations stretched for millennia, whose flesh did not rot, whose worlds sang with psychic harmony. To the Necrontyr, this was injustice made divine. Envy turned to doctrine, survival became faith. Their rulers rose as the Triarch, three monarchs who ruled by law and unity, seeking not comfort but conquest over mortality itself. They promised to find the answer the stars had denied them. In their chambers burned maps of dead worlds, diagrams of failed voyages, and cold declarations of unity carved into living metal. War came not from ambition but from desperation. The Necrontyr launched fleets of atomic fire and radiation-forged ships into the void to challenge those they envied. But their weapons, crude and mortal, failed against the ancient powers they faced. Beings of pure thought and energy, the old ones, whose mastery of the warp and the material made their counterattacks like storms of living consciousness. Worlds burned, fleets vanished, and the Necrontyr learned defeat. This hardened their resolve. If they could not match the old one's power through life, they would conquer death itself. Entire dynasties devoted their wealth to the science of preservation. Tomb cities were raised across their blasted world, fortresses of sarcophagi sealed against time. Their engineers experimented with necrodermis alloys, mind-mapping engines, and energy fields that could preserve consciousness after death. Yet their star still burned, and their bodies still failed. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In their observatories, Necrontyr astronomers recorded strange disturbances in the hearts of stars, patterns that moved with intent. These were not natural phenomena, but entities of impossible scale, sentient beings of stellar fusion and hunger. When the Necrontyr reached out to them, the entities responded. They were the Citan, the star gods, vampires of the cosmos. Before the first stars burned in steady light, there were storms, the ghost wind that howled through the newborn void. From that luminous hunger, shapes began to dream themselves into being. They were vast, beyond measure, feeding on the hearts of suns, clothed in the radiance of annihilation. These were the Citan, star gods without compassion or form, bound only by appetite. When the Necrontyr found them, they gave those hungering lights bodies of living metal. To the Triarch, they appeared as salvation. The Necrontyr forged bodies for them, shaping necrodermis vessels of self-repairing metal that could hold their cosmic essence. The first of these incarnations descended upon the Necrontyr's homeworld in radiant form, a god of light encased in iron. In exchange for corporeal form, the Citan offered what the Necrontyr most desired: freedom from death, the stilling of decay, the end of pain. It was a bargain that would change the galaxy forever. The Citan secretly demanded sustenance, not of matter, but of life essence, the animating energy of mortal souls, and in giving their new god's form, the Necrontyr had forged their own doom. The Silent King proclaimed this a divine covenant, the dawn of a new age. The rituals of the old order were burned, the cults of despair replaced by temples of radiant fire. The Necrontyr had found eternity, but not the one they expected. When the transformation began, it was presented as salvation, a noble end to suffering. The process was called biotransference. The Citan promised that the Necrontyr would be reborn in bodies of living metal, freed forever from disease, age, and pain. Entire cities gathered to witness the first rites. Bodies were laid upon altars of plasma and magnetism, flesh dissolving into light as consciousness was drawn into cold metal frames. The first to rise walked with purpose no mortal had ever known. Calm, exact, unbending. The Triarch declared that the age of weakness had ended, but in their triumph something terrible took root. The light of the Citan's power did not simply heal, it consumed. The cancerous radiance of the Necrontyr's dying sun had once devoured their bodies. Now, the Citan devoured their souls. What awoke from biotransference was not a people freed from mortality, but a species stripped of spirit. Their memories persisted, but their emotions, the human warmth that once defined them, were silenced. The Necrontyr had achieved endurance, but not peace. They had traded pain for obedience, mortality for servitude. The markets where children once learned to barter stood silent. Amphitheaters that once echoed with debate became data chambers cataloging yields of energy and obedience. Theaters, gardens, and homes now stood empty, irrelevant to beings who no longer hungered, slept, or loved. The Citan had their servants, and the Triarch's dream of salvation hardened into slavery. The Silent King, Sarek, watched as his empire glittered in lifeless perfection. The Necrontyr were gone. What remained were the Necrons. The age that followed was one of radiance and ruin. The Citan, now enthroned as gods of metal and flame, spread across the stars. Each world they touched became a forge world of devotion and consumption. Suns dimmed to feed their hunger. Planets were stripped of life and remade into shrines of energy harvest. And the Necrons, their minds bound to obedience, became both worshippers and instruments. Their phalanxes advanced in silence, machine-precise, tireless, and utterly without pity. Their gas weapons reduced flesh, stone, and spirit to dust. The Old Ones, masters of the warp and the webway, could no longer move freely. The webway, a network of stable tunnels within the warp that allowed instant travel between worlds, had once been their great triumph, a safe road between stars beyond demonic reach. But the Necrons, guided by the Citan, learned to pierce it using dolmen gates, vast machines that tore open artificial entrances into the webway. Through these gates, Necron legions struck deep into the sanctuaries of the Old Ones. They could not destroy the webway, but they could infest it, turning the Old One's greatest work into a battlefield. The Citan fed upon everything: stellar heat, mortal souls, even the psychic energy that threaded between realities. Each became a god of its own principle of hunger. The Nightbringer spread terror through the stars, teaching all living beings to fear death. The Deceiver turned rulers and species against one another, finding sustenance in deceit and ambition. Others fed on despair, greed, and endless war. Every sorrow of the living became nourishment for gods of fire and metal. The Silent King watched the glory he had built unravel into an empire of death. He had meant to deliver his people from suffering, but instead had forged a weapon that could end all life. The Citan's appetite was limitless. Whole systems were extinguished, their suns drained to darkness, their worlds left hollow. No victory satisfied them. The gods he had created now consumed the galaxy, that had once been theirs. So began the Second War in Heaven, fought not only between the Necrons and the Old Ones, but between gods and their makers. At first, the Old Ones resisted with the same brilliance that had once shaped the stars. In desperation, they turned to the warp, then still calm, a vast sea of thought and emotion. From its psychic depths, they wove living weapons, the graceful and gifted Eldari, masters of the immaterial, the mighty Krork, born for endless war, the Jokaero shaggy, simian engineers. They remember in instinct what their makers once knew by art. To the unknowing, they seem primitive, chattering beasts, clutching scavenged relics. Yet from those scraps they fashion wonders, voidcraft that defy physics, weapons that unmake matter, tools that reshape worlds, and 1,000 other races designed for battle. For a time, these new creations held back the tide, but the C'tan were vast, and their servants tireless. Across galaxies, the war raged. Suns detonated by the tens of thousands. Whole sectors became graveyards of dying light. The Old One's psychic children fought with brilliance, but burned out too quickly, their souls consumed by the C'tan, or lost to the instability their warfare unleashed. As reality strained beneath the weight of extinction, the C'tan rejoiced. The collapse of the Old One's dominion was to them a feast. They devoured the energy of dying stars and the psychic fallout of destroyed minds. To the star gods, this ruin was art, creation unmade and remade in hunger's image. But among the Necrons, something old began to stir. Even stripped of their souls, the deepest layers of their machine minds carried echoes of what they had been. They could not name sorrow or pity, but something within them recognized that the gods they served would never be satisfied. The C'tan consumed endlessly, not from need but from desire. In that realization, rebellion was born. While the C'tan hurled their legions to the last bastions of the Old Ones, the silent king prepared in secret. His dominion had become an empire of slaves. His people's transformation had delivered eternity, but at the cost of will. Zarek saw that the C'tan's hunger could not end while any star still burned, and so he conceived the only solution left: the destruction of the gods themselves. Through the dolmen gates, the Necrons launched their final campaigns. They no longer hunted the Old Ones. Most had already vanished into the void or exile. Now, their weapons turned upon the very beings they had once worshipped. In the darkest hours of the Necrons' ascendance, they forged a weapon not of flesh or soul, but of reality itself. Star forges and tomb worlds became foundries of annihilation. They named it the Fracture Lance, a beam of such ordered destruction that it could tear star gods from the web of creation. In the hidden crypt forges, the cryptex began their greatest labor, tesseract labyrinths that folded a god's essence into infinite reflection. The uprising had no herald. In one burning cluster, a Necron fleet turned its batteries upon the radiant form it once worshipped. Across the galaxy, legions rose in identical revolt. The C'tan awoke to betrayal and struck back with the fury of suns. Planets cracked, time quivered, light itself became weapon and poison. Every victory consumed a dynasty. Every god's death cost a system. The Nightbringer was first to fall, its essence ripped apart by the very weapons forged at its command. Its scream echoed through the fabric of reality, and from that moment onward, every mortal being would know the fear of death. The deceiver, foreseeing treachery, sought to dissolve the universe into illusion, but its laughter ended in collapse, a billion shards scattering like sparks from a dying forge. The Flayer virus is a direct consequence of the C'tan's destruction. Upon the obliteration of the C'tan known as the Flayer, his essence didn't dissipate quietly. Instead, it erupted in a final act of vengeance, infecting the Necrons with a curse of unending hunger and madness. This curse transformed the affected Necrons into the grotesque flayed ones, driven by an insatiable desire to consume the flesh of the living. This transformation is not just a physical change, but a profound alteration of the Necron's psyche. The Flayer virus is a reminder of the Citan's enduring influence. Even in death, it serves as a testament to the Necron's past and the price they paid for their rebellion. Other nameless Citan met the same fate, not slain but broken, their fragments still alive with malice. The gods of energy were undone by the precision of their own servants, yet victory brought no triumph. For every Citan unmade, countless Necron hosts perished, their bodies melted into rivers of cooling silver. They had learned how to kill gods, but not how to heal themselves. When the last divine light guttered out, the silent king saw what his rebellion had achieved. A universe stripped bare, its living tapestry reduced to ash and ghosts. No laughter remained in the warp, only the echo of grief. The old ones were gone. The Citan lay shattered, and the Necrons, victorious and immortal, stood alone amid a silence deeper than any night before it. The silent king stood amid the ruins and knew that his victory was meaningless. The Necrons had survived, but everything that made survival worth seeking was gone. He had given his people bodies that could never die, and in doing so had murdered their souls. The empire of the Necrons stretched across a dead galaxy, their dynasties filled with silent legions awaiting orders that no longer mattered. Sharek convened what remained of the Triarch and issued his final command. The Necrons would enter the Great Sleep. Their tomb worlds would fall silent beneath the sands of time, waiting for an age when the stars might live again. He deactivated his command protocols and vanished into the void, leaving his people and his sin behind. Thus ended the war in heaven. The old ones were gone, the Citan shattered, and the galaxy burned into quiet. From that silence, a new age would one day rise, one that would call the long-dead Necrons its nightmares, never knowing they had once been the victims of their own gods. Sharek knew that eternity without change was another form of death. He decreed the Great Sleep. The legions would lie dormant until the stars healed and memory softened their sins. One by one, the tomb worlds sealed, vaults locked behind mountains of self-repairing stone, sarcophagi filled with the hum of stasis fields drew the last warmth from their suns. Autonomous systems woke for the final time, legions of scarabs and canoptech drones spreading through each necropolis to repair, defend, and maintain the long sleep. When the last cryptech set his systems to standby, Zarek cast aside his crown and exiled himself into the intergalactic dark, a king without people, seeking penance in solitude. The galaxy exhaled. The wars of gods and machines were over, leaving only ruin and the trembling of the warp as it cooled. The first peace in millions of years was not brightness but absence, a silence vast enough to cradle what remained. The last sound before the silence was our own hearts breaking, inscription upon the stasis vault of the silent dynasty. When the stars went dim, we mistook the quiet for peace. Fragment from the tomb of the shard seers. When the war in heaven ended, there were no victors, only the ruins of divinity. Across the void, light itself seemed hesitant, as though creation feared to wake what it had buried. The galaxy drifted beneath veils of dust and silence. The warp, once a tranquil sea of thought, was now turbulent and scarred, thick with the psychic residue of uncounted deaths. It screamed in colors no Necron mind could perceive. The old ones were gone, their works, the webway, the seeded races, the scattered gene crafts, remained untended and perilous. Without shepherds, the galaxy's newborn species inherited a broken heaven. The survivors, Proto-Eldar, Krork, and countless minor experiments, crawled from the wreckage to inherit a cosmos already ancient and weary. The tomb worlds turned inward, entombed beneath layers of geomantic warding and alloy. Whole systems systems went dark as they folded into perfect stillness. Some dynasties refused the sleep, lingering in the ruins as spectral fleets, caretakers of monuments, guardians of nothing. The shards of the Citan fared worse. Once gods of flame and geometry, they now flickered as fragments of hunger, imprisoned within vaults or weapons their captors had made. Some drifted through nebulae, others sank into planetary cores, infecting matter around them with faint poisonous awareness. In some newborn stars, light itself seemed to remember its old masters. The warp did not rest. The psychic remnants of the slain old ones and their creations curdled there, spawning new horrors. From that pollution came the enslavers, entities born of the deaths of a billion minds. They breached the fractures between realities and fed upon what little organic life remained. The few mortal civilizations that survived the war in heaven perished in this plague of possession and madness. Thus did the first silence deepen into the second, not the quiet of exhaustion, but the hush of extinction. No empire rose again for 100 million years. Worlds healed, oceans returned, primitive life crept once more beneath skies emptied of gods. Yet the scars endured, voids where galaxies had burned, regions where the warp still screamed, and beneath them all, the crypts of the undying. The tomb worlds dreamed of nothing. They had surrendered that gift when they abandoned their souls, but the universe dreamed of them. In the storms of newborn suns, patterns flickered that mirrored their sigils. In the slow pulse of neutron stars, echoes of their march resounded. Even in deathless rest, they remained the architecture of silence. When the final pulse of the last god shard faded, Zarek's exile carried him beyond the galactic rim. There he looked back upon the faint spiral of the Milky Way, a scar across eternity, and spoke to no one. May they sleep until forgiveness finds them. The galaxy turned without witness. Aeons became epochs, dust became continents, then dust again. When at last the tomb worlds stirred, their senses found a universe unrecognizable, one ruled by fragile, brief things that called themselves alive. But that awakening lies beyond this age. The war in heaven ended not with triumph, but with a whisper. It left the material realm stripped of gods, and the immaterial realm haunted by them. From that void would one day rise the long chain of civilizations, Eldari, Orc, human, each doomed to repeat in miniature what the ancients had done in grandeur. Yet for a time too vast to measure, the galaxy knew a rare and precious thing: silence. In the quiet between stars, the dead remember what the living have forgotten. Final inscription, Codex Necronica Primus.